Hello, welcome to another episode of The High Ground, powered by Premier Companies. Jeff, how are you this morning?
I'm wonderful. How are you, Sal?
You're always wonderful. Well, we have a special guest, and I know we always say that, but today we really mean it. Our CEO, Harold Cooper, is joining us in the podcast room. Good morning, Harold.
Well, good morning. Thanks for having me back.
Well, we're going to hit you with the question of the day right off the bat.
All right.
The question of the day is, tell us about one of your most favorite recent book or article, and what was it about, and what did you like about it?
Okay. And I think in this podcast later, we'll be getting a little bit as far as the way I lean on decision making. And so I will reference military. Recently, I've read, for anyone that wants to experience the Civil War more, you obviously go to Gettysburg. I would contend, if you ever go to Gettysburg, you first need to visit Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville to really set up the understanding of what went on those 3 days at Gettysburg. And so recently I just read a book that was called Chancellorsville and Gettysburg. Exceptional. It was written by Abner Doubleday, who was one of the generals on the field at the time. So you really got to see some firsthand accounts from his perspective of things that were going on and be able to look back on it. So I would strongly recommend that to anyone that would like to learn more about that element of history.
Okay. Well, Jeff, you want to take it down here a few notches? I did say article. I put that in there for you.
Thanks, Sal. You were so kind.
Crop nutrient publications. I mean, there's those.
Yeah, that's what I say. I read the green markets.
Yeah, I knew
Actually, I cheated when I saw this based on our guest, and I cheated from the standpoint it's not recent. It's been a while. Red Badge of Courage.
Oh, yeah.
That's a good one.
So
Yes.
that's, we had to go back to the Civil War, not written from a general's perspective like a lot of them.
Yeah.
that was, I think that was just
That's
from
a great book.
Yeah.
soldier's perspective
Yes.
and dealing with fear and stuff. So, so I knew I would be scared in here this morning because my boss is here. And so I chose Red Badge of Courage.
Well, there you go.
That's a good one. I'm all over the board. I like, I got all kinds of different, I get in the mood to read history, get in the mood to read everything from shoot 'em up spy novels but lately been doing a lot of historical fiction. So, and one of those was, it's Shores of Tripoli, a military book. Sounds like I'm with the audience here, but written by James Haley, and it's a neat way to read. It's a neat way to read history that it talks about the ships and how they, in 1800s, and just that they could take a wooden ship all the way halfway around the world and then fight with it is just pretty neat. So that was back in the Thomas Jefferson days and wooden ships.
There's lots of good books out from guys that were in the global war on terror. And there's some of those I'd like to read. I just haven't got around to it yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
I read that one, the last man standing. I think that was a good one. But we'll get off top. We'll talk about that we'll be on 30, 40 minutes talking about that. Well, Harold, tell us a little bit about, I guess, Premier Ag, the company, and how cooperatives, a little bit of history. I know this is one of your favorite topics. So just a little history of how cooperatives were formed in Indiana. And I wouldn't mind hearing the story of the handshake again for our listeners.
All right. So I guess I love this idea, and it gets back, I think, a little bit later, we're going to talk about my approach to leadership. And it honestly begins here that from my perspective, I have never been much of one for self-help books or contemporary writers trying to describe leadership. The things I will rely on as crutches will go back to a lot of times history. I think events change. I think the things we have to encounter as technology or improvements happen all around us, and you get disruptors in an economy or in an industry. But fundamentally, go back to the way people think and behave. That's fairly consistent over all time. Certainly the things that we have to encounter and deal with change, but the way people think changes. And to your question, when you start thinking about the foundation of cooperatives and why we were formed and what was going on around our farmers when it was formed, I always like to brag on this one point, but we were the first cooperative in Indiana, February 9th, 1927. And when you think about that period of time and what was going on in that period of time, we just completed the First World War in 1919. Our country had experienced Spanish flu, which was much more devastating, had a much higher death loss across the nation than what COVID was. And now we're in what's called the Roaring 20s. But really, that was a time for rural America that it was still a difficult time. And we still lacked roads, we still lacked electricity, lacked plumbing. A lot of the things that had become common in a lot of our cities were still not available in rural America. And going along with that, then, it was also depressed commodity prices. There was lack of farm income at the farms. They were also experiencing unfair trade practices, lack of quality in what they were purchasing, lack of availability, lack of choice, and lack of supply. So all those things kind of got together, and in 1927, they finally got in a room. I assume it was a local church somewhere, and said, if we keep relying on others to help supply what we need on our individual farms, this is never going to happen. And to sit around together and collectively with really no resource other than ambition and need, that's all the capital they could bring to this discussion.
Wow.
Forming a co-op is an amazing statement to me. Just, we need to do this ourselves. We need to take some control of this. I can't do it with my own individual farm, but collectively together, maybe we can make something happen. And out of that first notion in 1927, you think about what happened just after that. Well, we experienced a Great Depression. We experienced another Second World War. And by 1940, that group of farmers had gotten together to form regional co-ops, to form things like Land O'Lakes. In our case, a refinery. I can imagine in 13 years, because in 1940, these Indiana farmers got together in a room and said, we found oil down in Mount Vernon, Indiana. Why don't we build a refinery and a 260-mile pipeline? Who does that?
Yeah.
I mean, who absolutely does that? And so when I think about what happens here and how do you guide and lead Premier, I first look back, what was the character and the makeup of those that formed us? And that should be enduring in my mind. We should still find aggressiveness and ambition and improvement in trying to enable our farmers who are very much self-determined, they're independent-minded. How do we still find a way to collectively bring their interests together and give them more advantage in a very large international marketplace today, but still bring it back to their farms? And so those are the things that motivate me.
So in 1927, they get together. They've got this common need. Did they have a model from another state or another? Were there co-ops out there that they knew about that said, "Hey, we need to do what they're doing," or how did that evolve?
Yeah, there's actually two attempts before 1927, and both of them were on a pure break-even basis. That they all just said, "Let's commit the capital needed to buy a train load or carload of fertilizer, and when we have that thing unloaded, we're done." That didn't work. And so finally in 1927, they adopted a model out of, I won't remember the year, but they adopted a model out of Rochdale Weavers out of England. And these bunch of sheep wool buyers had formed a co-op called the Rochdale Weavers that was for profit. And it developed 7 cooperative principles out of that we still deal with today. So for the first time in 1927, we understood, the farmers that were before us understood, it needed to have some measure of profitability to it, some return, to be able to build asset and pay labor and do those things and not just break even on each and every transaction. And so we still employ today the Rochdale Weavers model, which was the first successful co-op model in the United States.
Interesting.
That's a good, neat question. You said that how people think and behavior is consistent over time. And so how does that, as a student of history and particularly military history, how do you take those ideas and apply them to leadership today?
Well, and it's especially fun in our company talking to you, Sal, because you have a military background. In fact, Marine, as I understand it. So the Marines were created at shores of Tripoli. So I understand your interest there. But when again, I see so many companies get captured by just the contemporary ideas of how do you lead or manage or move a company. And for me, just fundamentally, when you're thinking about decision making and you're thinking about how do I succeed in a marketplace, I think there's a lot to be learned, not only from history, but specifically military history. Military tends to be, and battles tend to be, those places where if you're going to be successful, you have to have very strong objectives. You have to understand your capabilities as much as you can, understand your competition's capabilities, and do that in a firefight, do that in an engagement. And those moments bring together when you're in the act of conflict. And I'm talking about business conflict here. When you're act of conflict, it manifests and brings forward the best and the worst of everyone. It also rewards tendencies. I think a lot of times that company that has been the best at, first off, strategic planning, understand roles and expectations. Secondly, speed, clear-cut communication. But speed tends to be rewarded in military conflict. Measured risk, and being able to understand this is a calculated measured risk. Go back to Chancellorsville. I don't know we'll get much into that battle, but I mean, General Lee was half the force of the Union forces he was facing. With 60,000 troops, he was facing Hooker's army of 115,000. Just real quickly, the first thing you never do when you're outnumbered by an opposing force is split your army. Lee splits his twice. He goes from 60,000 split down to 15,000 and 45,000. And then he finally sent Stonewall Jackson, on a flanking maneuver with 30,000 troops. And he won the day. Now, that's not something you should prescribe to do, but Lee had a vision. He had an understanding of his capability, the morale of his troops, and the hesitation of his opposing force. And he capitalized on that.
You talk about hesitation. I think in business sometimes that's where a company that can react quick, and maybe your competition does hesitate. Do you see that? Have you seen that across your career and successes
Absolutely.
you've had from that?
I think if I would to look back over my, I think 48-year career right now, I would say the greatest attribute to any success that has been associated with me has been our willingness, or my willingness, to be bold and aggressive, and everyone else trying to give decision-making time. For me, anytime you can give decision-making time, you can get more information, you can reduce the risk, the uncertainty, absolutely. But I'm also extremely comfortable. If I can get to 51%, I can pull the trigger and I'm fine. If I can get to more than, it's a 50-50 proposition in my mind of whether to go forward or not to go forward, let's be bold, let's be aggressive. There's a very good chance if it's close to 50-50, it's wrong. Be sensitive to that. Be ready to change. Be ready to back up and move a different direction. But when you're bold and aggressive and everyone else is sitting there trying to wait and delay and understand it better, you are, to this podcast name, you own the high ground. Yeah. You are there first. And just try to knock me off that hill.
That's neat. One of the, it's interesting you say that some of the things that they, this wasn't one of their original strategic imperatives in 1927, but it's certainly one of ours, is to have a farmer-owned cooperative in every market. Mm-hmm. And how, just from what you said initially, with why and how cooperatives are formed and what we are today, and still carrying forward some of that, what does that mean to a grower?
Yeah, and I still believe those same dynamics in a much different way. They manifest themselves in much different ways in 2024 than in 1927. But you still, I think, have an important aspect of always making sure that there's a farmer's voice at every level of the distribution channel, of the logistics channel. And I love the idea, and it is our first objective. Again, you have to have clear-cut objectives as an organization. Our very first one is to have a farmer-owned choice in every market, every geography. And we have been bold with that notion. Sometimes a few years ago, we tried to get into e-commerce and ways to sell product across internet. Well, that is in conflict with the amount of assets we have invested in buildings and warehouses, rolling stock and people. I mean, if you can start making that a very minimal transaction online with the internet, it really disrupts our present investment. I don't care. If that's the way our farmers want to buy, if that's an efficient way to ultimately move product, as something farmer owned, we need to be the aggressor there. We need to be the first to understand it. And even in that space, make sure the farmer's voice is heard, is a part of it, and understood. And I think it makes an absolute big difference. I mean, we roughly, I estimate in southern Indiana where we operate, where we have a facility within 45 minutes of that facility, we have roughly 50% of the marketplace in agronomy. You look out one side of the windshield driving on the road, that's what we serve. We don't serve it all. We never will serve it all. But I think it makes a big difference when there is something farmer owned out there that it forces not only us. I report to a 12-member board every month.
Of farmers.
Of farmers. Of farmers. Every month I'm held to account directly. Did you have our interest first? And I think it not only makes us better and more sensitive to that, but I think it makes our competition as well. That when they see us out first considering the needs of the farmer, that's not to say we don't also consider almost equally the needs of Premier. We have to be able to sustain and survive longer term. We're almost a 100-year-old company. We can't do everything at the expense of Premier for our grower. It has to work for both. But when we do that, when we put the farmer first, we try to give a farmer choice in every market and every geography, I think it makes the entire marketplace better and at least more sensitive to the need of that farmer.
So you've been in the cooperative system for 48 years.
Mm-hmm.
As you go through those 5 decades, what's been the challenges and how have you adapted because farmers change, the next generation takes over.
Yeah.
How do you keep that farmer-owned choice? How do you keep that relevant in the mind of the next generation that's taking over? Because I think that's something that our salespeople need to know, how they talk to the young guy that's taken over the farm from dad and grandpa, and how do they stay relevant in his mind?
And that's been a difficult,
as a cooperative.
And I think it's a great question. And it's one I think you personally have dealt with well, by the way. But what has driven a lot of what agriculture, I can remember sitting in Purdue, Joe Yule and Dave Downey in the late 70s talking about farmers are going to get larger and larger. Dave Downey made the notion someday all the farmers in the United States are going to fit in a football stadium, which is coming fairly true today. And as those farmers have so dramatically changed and gotten larger themselves, it really puts a lot of pressure on that statement of locally owned, locally controlled. I mean, how can we sit here as a cooperative that basically occupies 75% of southern Indiana as a single entity and say we're locally owned, locally controlled? Well, that's what it looks like in 2024. And I think we have to always be able, as something for the farmer, as close as we can keep governance and control to that farmer, we absolutely want to. I very much am opposed to some of my brethren that I think see the cooperative system as a single entity across our country, or even maybe across North America, or even the world. I like it better, just as I like our country. Our country is a republic, and we actually our national governance is accountable to 50 states. And I like the idea. I've used this example in the past, but when our nation was dealing with COVID, we didn't prescribe one single remedy from Washington, D.C. We had 50 states were using the best information they had available to them and trying to ascertain with that state, how do we best deal with this? And you saw very different approaches through COVID as far as what New York might be doing versus Florida versus any other state. I'm still frustrated that we're picking on each other. None of us knew.
No.
But through that laboratory, we were able to gather, I think, longer term, a quicker answer to what was working and what was not working, rather than prescribing one central approach from one single entity in Washington, D.C. Same's true for the co-op world. I think the more we can put authority and decision-making at local levels, there will be some failure in that, but there'll be success, and that success can be transferred. And we keep that going. And I like these areas of local governance, local control that you can transfer success. And that's how we've existed for the first 100 years. And I think it'll be a sad day for the farmer if the cooperative ever loses all of that. And so the dynamic, to get back to your question, I think the dynamic we face and a lot of co-ops face is what's the right size? Because I can't be, when I started, there were 77 co-ops in 92 counties in Indiana. There's effectively 4 today. I think there's legally 9. And it's hard to go back to that same group and say, well, we're still here for you locally. Well, local today is the Ohio River. Local today is a shared interest in livestock. Local today is the culture and the differences of Southern Indiana versus other areas of the country. And those are, to me, things we can aggregate and provide solutions and commonality around. And that's as close as we can get to local today.
It doesn't stop at the county line anymore. I mean, it's a true market. I mean, what kind of commonality do you have with, just like we were talking a little bit earlier about feed, right? I mean, there's a lot of folks have a lot of commonality in one area.
Yeah.
Talking about just the speed of change, and go back a little bit to some of the comments. You went and through Purdue University and Dial Ventures, and I thought that was pretty bold of Premier Ag to reach a partnership with Dial Ventures. So could you kind of explain just a little bit about what Dial Ventures is? And we're going to have one on here in a little bit, but how that came about and what that addresses.
Well, and I mentioned Commodity Ag, which actually was a failure for us with that investment we did in Commodity Ag with e-commerce a few years ago. But I hope Premier always stays bold in trying to understand new ways to improve efficiencies, new ways to make things better for all stakeholders, definitely our farmers. But if we can do that at the consumer channel, we definitely want to look for those kinds of things. Dow is an exciting enterprise, originally founded by Purdue, but Purdue's trying to sit there and use its intellect and its capability of research and understanding where its marketplace is going. And how do we go in this case, into digital applications or data? And can we help retailers or farmers or other parts of the industry better manage data in decision making? And they actually formed a separate company. It's startup venture capital with Purdue's intellect behind it. And I find that an exciting thing to be doing, to be able to, with Purdue and them attracting 12 different fellows across the country. So what Purdue in that model is doing right now, they're attracting 12 successful business people every year to use their success in industries that are not agriculture, transfer that over if possible to us and say, let's do it this way. These fellows may not know anything about ag, may not even be able to spell ag, but they know what it takes to be successful and to transfer their success in that industry into agriculture, and for Premier to get a chance to help be a part of that and see that first to enable that is an extremely exciting technology. I'd like to bring up one more if I could.
Yeah.
I love what you guys have done on robots. I mean, when you look at Solentech and you look at right now we're working with a company that's literally out of Brazil that has 44 robots, or had 44 robots in 2024 that were sentinels going up and down the field, roughly 2 miles an hour, solar powered, with the ability to see and spray. So when they saw a weed, it turned on one nozzle, sprayed that weed, and kept going. And of the 44 robots that are available last year, Premier had 12 of those. And I can tell you, if that is successful as it potentially could be, I mean, we've seen a 65% reduction in row crop products, in crop protection products with that technology. That is our bottom line in agronomy. If that would truly manifest itself, if that would truly happen, we have just eliminated all of our profitability in row crop in our agronomy business. Well, Premier ought to be a little worried about that, I guess. But in my mind, if it works, we should be the aggressor. We should be the ones making sure we advance and make sure that is available sooner, not later. And we learn in that early involvement how to incorporate it into our understanding and our capabilities, and may have to resize ourselves. But I love always, if we're fine, we should always be in a posture of trying to help our farmers get themselves in a better position, in this case, than other farmers in other states. Farmers in Southern Indiana right now are experiencing that technology uniquely and differently and sooner than other producers they, quote, are competing against on a national or international basis. I love that.
Yeah.
That's interesting. That's, I think it's interesting too that you bring these fellows in at Dial coming from other industries. They're going to look at stuff and how to plug that into our industry and ask questions that sometimes we don't ask ourselves. And that, the old saying that, the 7 most expensive words of business, we've always done it that way. So I think it's interesting if those guys come in and they just ask, why do you do it that way?
Yeah.
Well, we've always done it that way.
We had an example. Was riding with some of our account managers, and one of the account managers was like, "Well, I got to go back and get the order put in, and at the office." And he goes, "Why do you go back to the office?" I mean, it was just so simple.
Yeah.
And he's like,
punch it in on your phone.
Yeah, he goes, "Can't you do that remotely?" And of course we do have that ability, but it's just a habit, muscle memory of going back and doing things the same way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That is, Jeff, what else we got today? That's about all I've got.
I think it's just good to hear you come in and give your perspective from the seat that you sit in, and with all your past experience and stuff. And I think the other thing that's especially important for the Premier employees is to hear the way that you look at the markets, that you're not scared of robotic sprayers when we look at how much that could cut out from our crop protection business. It's also a reason why I can't let them have a robotic fertilizer spreader, is that I don't want them to cut my fertilizer, but I think that's important. And so is there any other message that you could pass on to our employees that make them feel better about their future at Premier?
The only thing I can say is, and this becomes, it's unfortunate sometimes you see an employee where they're in a job that they're there for a paycheck. And I would like to think for anyone, I hope that you can always find a place where you feel more satisfaction than I earned a living today. And I think a cooperative offers a unique motivator in that regard. Again, and for me, and it gets back, I didn't tell it earlier, it gets back to the Cliff Osterman story, but when I started, I was a freshman out of Purdue. I had zero interest in cooperatives. Didn't know what cooperative was. Had zero interest. Candidly, I hoped I was going to be able to make a lot of money early in my career. I wanted to run for governor someday, and that was my notion when I was in my teens of what I wanted to do with my life. And to come down here to this cooperative just out of my freshman year, and I was here for nothing more than a paycheck. And one of the first days of work, I was driving a tender truck and fertilizer. The other tender truck driver pulled up behind me, and this guy gets out of a cab. He's in his late 60s, if not older. He's 5'8", small in stature, and sorry for some, but and he was walking with a pronounced limp. And that's a physical thing that you do in spring when you're putting on fertilizer and taking care of farmers' needs. The guy clearly shouldn't have been doing it, and I felt bad that he had to be there that day, and that was his way of trying to survive and get along. And I found out quickly that his name was Cliff Osterman, and he had had my job before me, and he had retired after I think 48 years and just came back because he enjoyed what he was doing. And Cliff took me under his arm that summer, and we spent a lot of time together. He taught me what co-ops are. He expressed to me, I hope, what I'm expressing today, because he made me, if you can't tell, he's made me a believer. It made me passionate about something that I think matters. And so when you talk about employees and what could be next for someone, I hope we're able to convince our employees what we're doing truly does matter. There is something unique, different, and special about a cooperative. I hope that's more so true with Premier. I hope we prove ourselves as an employer, as someone that truly cares about not only the farmer, but its employees. And we remain aggressive. It's fun to be where the action is. You can go to a casino at 2 a.m. The thing is dead except that one craps table where it's going nuts. I want to be that guy. I want to be where the action is and people are attracted to us because of what we're accomplishing and what we're doing. Yeah. And so that's what I would advise. Before I retire, I want to shake the hand of everyone under the age of 21, because this company will have had, in my case, almost 97 of the 100 years it's been in existence. I would love another 50 years to be added to that. So
that's neat.
I think if our especially our young employees that are just starting out, maybe they're starting out driving a tender truck, they could be the next CEO.
There you go.
That's right.
That's
yeah.
All right. Well, Harold, thanks for joining us on our next favorite episode.
All right.
And if you think we did a good job, Harold, give us a raise.
Hit your like button. Yes. I'll hit your like button instead.
Oh, great.
No raise for us, Sal. He's got a like button.
All right. Well, that's another episode of The High Ground, powered by Premier Companies. Thank you very much.
Thank you.